Steinberg, and I did my presentation on tourism and disaster. So let's start with a couple of definitions. What exactly does tourism and disaster mean? Well, tourism is the commercial organization and operation of vacations and visits to places of interest, and disaster is a sudden event such as an accident or a natural catastrophe that causes great damage or loss of life. So what if you are on a vacation and a disaster strikes? Well, my personal experience comes from Hurricane Emily in 2005. Me and my family were vacationing in Cancun on the Yucatan Peninsula. And once this hurricane did make landfall, we were woken up by employees in the middle of the night and told to leave our belongings and evacuate our rooms. So once we evacuated, they took us to a great ballroom, but half of the room was covered in windows, and they decided that it wasn't safe for us. So they moved us down to the basement in the kitchen area, and we slept in the hotel in the kitchen on the floor all night. So it was good that they had a disaster plan in place for tourists, because this hurricane did cause a lot of damage to the island and the actual hotel itself. So why is it important to have a disaster plan for tourists? Well, traveling is a huge deal in this country and internationally. It is important that countries need to take tourists into their disaster management plan, which many of them already do. Usually tourists help when a disaster strikes, but sometimes tourism can hurt recovery efforts to the local population. An example of this is the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. So this tsunami happened, and tourism actually injured and got in the way of the recovery process for local residents. Because the government was so focused on their investments in the tourism district, many local residents were struggling well after this tsunami had struck. So how can you personally prepare if you are traveling to a new place? Well, if you're traveling to a new place or internationally, make sure to research that country or place's disaster plan. So if a disaster does strike, you and your family will be prepared and you will be less vulnerable. So look up evacuation routes is a good way to get prepared, as well as becoming familiar with local communication outlets. So if something were to happen or go wrong, you would be aware of it in a quickly and timely manner. So the government has its own way of preparing for disasters in tourist towns or resort areas. They require each hotel to develop its own individual emergency management plan. They also make sure the hotel compiles a list of all the tourists staying in the area so they can keep track of everyone, as well as make sure the employees are well aware of what to do in case an emergency strikes, and establishing modes of communication before an emergency or disaster strikes. The response and recovery units for disasters in tourist towns also have pre-set up notions. So when a disaster strikes, shelter use tends to be higher in areas with a larger tourist population. So those communities should be prepared to accommodate more people during peak travel season. Service industry employees should also relay information about imminent threats to tourists in an explicit manner. The hotel manager or city official should draft and issue timely multilingual notices to each hotel explaining the latest development from the National Weather Service or local officials regarding weather type of disasters. Now, for recovery, local officials and hotel managers must take precautions to ensure their people's safety. Local government should inform guests that it may not be safe to walk around the area due to downed power lines and other hazards that could be possible. A place that I think has a good disaster plan is Disney World. They attract millions of tourists year-round, so it would make sense for them to have a good disaster plan. Now, their plan does encompass many different kinds of disasters, but the main three that they are prepared for are earthquakes at their California and Tokyo locations, and hurricanes and other severe weather events at their Orlando location. So how does Disney handle earthquakes? Both areas in California and Tokyo have seen their fair share of earthquakes over the years, and all cast members are trained to follow a certain standard safety policy and procedure. So the second an earthquake hits, all rides will be stopped. Most rides actually have an automatic shutdown trigger that will be set off by even the smallest tremor. But if that fails for some reason, a cast member can manually turn off the ride the moment an earthquake is felt. Guests that are outside when an earthquake hits will be directed by cast members to the closest interior area near them. Though guests may be tempted to leave interior areas after the initial shaking stops, cast members will ask them to continue to shelter in place just in case there are aftershocks that are following the initial earthquake. So Disney also has extensive plans about what they do during tropical storms, hurricanes, and severe weather. Now, Disney World Orlando has been the target for a lot of natural disasters. The resort has been hit with more than 24 hurricanes and tropical storms over the course of its 40-year history. So the resort is one of the most well-prepared places in the country, and I actually provided a link if you want to read about their extensive plan, because it would take me too long to go over each step-by-step detail. But they do ensure the safety of the park guests, and all employees are trained with what to do. So even though Walt Disney World has a long-term plan in place for severe weather brought on by a hurricane, dangerous thunderstorms can form in only a few hours being in Central Florida. So the resort has its different methods for preparing for a severe weather event versus a tropical storm and a hurricane. But the main thing is that in situations like this, it is very important to listen to cast members, keep your party together, and keep calm during this event.